Hey guys, it's Darwin here with a post PCT Thru-Hike Q&A to answer a bunch of your questions that you asked over 4 months while I was on the trail. I got a ton of questions and comments here on YouTube, over on Instagram, and on Facebook of things you guys wanted to know about my hike from Mexico to Canada. So today, I figured I would finally answer a bunch of the most commonly asked questions. I watched through all of these today, and I was wondering, minus injuries and up in the Sierra Nevada, what was your average cadence on the trail? So John, my average cadence on the PCT is pretty similar to the cadence that I always have when I do hikes. I typically hike about 3 miles an hour. I have pretty long legs and a pretty long stride, and I just kind of like to boogie and move down the trail. So typically I hike 3 miles an hour. Now, obviously that was different right in the beginning, whenever I was still trying to get my legs under me. It was definitely different when I got that injury around Wrightwood, California, when I got that little tear in my tendon in my leg, and it definitely dropped whenever I was in the Sierra Nevada because of all the snow and the post holing and the higher elevation. Those days I was probably getting maybe 2, sometimes 2.5 miles an hour. There might even been some days where I was only getting 1.5 mile an hour, especially in the Sierra. But for most of the trail, I would say I was hiking about 3 miles an hour. Which do you hate more, biting flies or mosquitoes? Mosquitoes. God, are mosquitoes awful. This trail, the PCT, was some of the worst mosquitoes I've ever seen in my life. And I grew up in southern Indiana and hiked the Appalachian Trail, where some of the worst mosquitoes in the world are right around that Massachusetts area, especially in the summer. But southern Oregon took the cake as far as mosquito infestations go. Now, the main reason I got mosquitoes so bad is I was hiking into Oregon right during the beginning of mosquito season, so they were just horrible. There were certain times of the day where I couldn't stop hiking because they were just hundreds of them swarming me all over the place, and my legs made me look like I had some sort of a disease or leprosy. And then as soon as I got into Washington, that was the start of their mosquito season too. They weren't as bad in southern Washington, but they were still pretty gnarly, and something I'll never forget for sure. As far as biting flies, I never really did get biting flies too bad. There were some towards the end of Washington, but that was about it. But yeah, if I had to take one or the other, I'll take biting flies any day over the mosquitoes that were on the PCT. You are no longer using the knock trekking poles. What happened? So when I was in the Sierra Nevada, I essentially was just snapping trekking poles left and right. Now, the trekking poles that I happened to be using at the time were the knock carbon cork trekking poles. I absolutely love those poles. They've been some of my favorite. However, as deep of the post holing that I was doing, they just didn't survive. Now, I don't know if it was because they were knock trekking poles, or really if I would have had any other trekking pole, if they would have snapped all the same. What was happening is I was post holing and my pole was going all the way in, and then I was falling on top of my pole. It happened 3 times that I fell over my pole and it just snapped. There's a certain part of the pole that is a little weak, I guess, where it kind of snaps into place, and that's where it was breaking. I ended up switching to my black diamond carbon cork poles, which were also carbon, and I didn't get to pick those up until Mammoth. And at that point, I was really out of all of the hardcore snow that I was post-holing in. So who knows if those would have snapped too. And then I'm sure even if I had aluminum poles, I probably would have bent the crap out of those. I do plan on using more of the knock carbon poles in the future, but as far as I'm concerned, for the Sierra, at least the high Sierra, they didn't work out so well. Now, coming off that question is, how do you set your tent up without a pole? Just find a stick or something? So I would assume what you are referring to is there was a time during the Sierra, if you watch those videos, that I only have one pole, and that's because the other one was broken. So because I use a trekking pole tent that takes 2 trekking poles to set it up, luckily the guy that I was hiking through the Sierra with, his name is Cruz, he had a freestanding tent, so he didn't need his trekking poles to set his tent up. So every night he just let me use one of his. Now, I probably could have used a stick. I know there's a lot of people that have done that in the past, but I was using one of Cruz's poles. Luckily, I had him with me, and he had some poles that he wasn't using. Did you recover your spork? No, I never did get my spork back. What Mark is referring to is, for years I've had this long-handled aluminum Sea to Summit spork. It has been on every single hike with me. It's fed me every single meal since 2014, and I lost it right before the halfway point in California. What happened was I took it out of my food bag to eat lunch. I set it on the ground, and when I packed everything back up, I forgot to grab it. I am still on the lookout for it though, so if you are on the PCT right before Chester, California, right before the halfway point, and you find a long-handled Sea to Summit Alpha aluminum spork, get a hold of me. I would love to have that thing back. Did you use the ice axe? So Jordan, I did carry my Camp Corsa ice axe all the way through the Sierra, though I would say that I probably only used it twice. Whenever we were going over Forester Pass, there's this like super crazy snow chute. I definitely used that to make sure that I was anchored in. And then there was a couple other times that I used it. I did have the ice axe. I ended up not really using it that much. However, I know a lot of people that went through the Sierra about the same time I did and actually had to self-arrest with their ice axe because they slipped and started sliding down something. So I would still suggest bringing one because you never know what kind of situation that you're going to be in. But in the long run, could I have not taken it? Yes. Would I take it again? Yeah, I think I would. Keep wondering how you edit and upload these videos on the trail. So Jeffrey, I actually did not edit any videos or upload them to YouTube on the PCT. So before I started my Thru-Hike of the PCT, I ended up beginning a relationship with a video editor named Pendergast. Now, if you watched any of my Pinhoti Trail Thru-Hike videos, she did all the edits on those, and then I decided to bring her on for my PCT Thru-Hike just to take a little bit of load off my shoulders, make it easier so I could really focus on my hike. Next week, I'm going to be doing a Q&A with my editor, Kat, so keep an eye out for that, and we'll answer a bunch of different questions about making my PCT video series. Would you rather be in the cold of the Sierras or the heat of the Mojave? The heat of the Mojave, 100%. And that's really just because I love the desert, especially the desert section of the PCT. The first 700 miles were some of my favorite miles on the entire trail. Whenever I was going through the snow and the cold of the Sierra, I was just post-holing all the time, and it just kind of sucked. So if I had to take one or the other, it would definitely be the heat of the Mojave, because in the long run, over all 700 miles, there was really only one day that it was super hot and kind of hard to deal with. It was right before Tehachapi, California. It got crazy hot that day. It was a long stretch without water, and there was no shade. Aside from that, the first 700 miles were awesome and great hiking. So I would definitely take the heat of the Mojave over the cold of the Sierra. I don't understand why snowshoes would not help with post-holing. Now, this is one of the most commonly asked questions and commonly left comments that I got during my PCT Thru-Hike. Now, the reason I did not use snowshoes and the reason a lot of hikers didn't use snowshoes this year was because of the type of snow that we had. So I've done a bunch of snowshoeing in the past when I lived in New Mexico, up in Colorado at Cumbres Pass around the CDT, and then I did a big snowshoeing trip up around Wheeler Peak in the Taos Valley last year. And for snowshoes to really function well, you need nice, pretty cruisy flat terrain and dry, packed snow. The problem with the snow in the Sierra this year was it was really wet and it was melting fast. So you weren't really able to cruise on top of that snow. That's why all the post-holing was happening. So if you're on that type of a snow with snowshoes, you're just sinking more and making a bigger post hole. So in the long run, they just wouldn't have helped that much. Plus, for snowshoes to work really well, they need nice, smooth terrain, and most of the trail going through the Sierra Nevada on the PCT is off camber and rocky. So whenever you're kind of on the edge of like a cliff or a drop or something, snowshoes don't really get the traction that they get when they're on flat surface. plus all the rocks and scramble, they just wouldn't have been a good option to use. I would say that if I did have them, I would only be able to use them about 10% of the time. So the other 90% of the time that I'd be carrying them, I'd just be putting them on and off and on and off. And for me, that's just not efficient hiking. So that is why I didn't use snowshoes. Got a little bit dark on me, some overcast. So it seems like there were more miles packed into these last few videos. Like, I was surprised that Washington was summed up in just 2 videos. Was that just my imagination? So the reason Oregon and Washington went so fast in my PCT series is I was only in Oregon for 14 days and 2 of those days were zeros. So technically it only took me 12 days to hike Oregon. So I wasn't there a lot, so I didn't film a lot of footage. The other reason is because even though I'm there a lot, if I just keep shooting the same thing, the stories wouldn't really be as interesting. I try to focus and build a story out of the most important aspects of what I'm filming. So if I just made the video everything that I saw, it'd be pretty boring and pretty long. So I tried to sum up those videos as nicely as I could to tell a good story for you guys. Now, Washington was no different. I was only in Washington for 15 days and same thing. I shot a lot of footage, but in the end, we use what works best for the story and what is going to be interesting for you guys to see. So a lot of the stuff just didn't make it to those videos. Also keep in mind that California was 1,700 miles long. So obviously there were more videos in California than there ever would have been in the 490 something miles of Oregon and the 500 miles of Washington. So that is why those videos were summed up in just a couple videos, because there just wasn't enough footage to cover them. Why did you change packs and why this one? What water filter have you changed to and why? Are you still hiking in the ultra temps? So the reason I changed packs from the Z-Packs Arc Blast to the Waymark Thru 40 was just because I wanted to try something different, and that pack seemed like the right one to pick up. So there wasn't anything wrong with my Z-Packs pack, I just wanted to switch it up. As far as water filters, I went from a Sawyer Squeeze to the Katadyn Be-Free 1 liter filter. Again, just because I wanted to try something different over the last 500 miles. And as far as the ultra temps go, I've never hiked in the ultra temps. I was hiking in a pair of Lone Peak 3.5s, and then when I couldn't find a pair in my size anywhere, not even on the internet, I ended up switching to the Ultra Olympus 3.0. And I'm glad I did, because those have become my new favorite hiking shoe. They just got more cushion and they feel a lot better. So the reason I switched to those 3 pieces of gear towards the end was just because I wanted to test out some new gear, and what better place than the last 500 miles of the PCT. Alright guys, last question that I'm going to answer for my post PCT Q&A. Is there just a big difference in the terrain between the AT and PCT so that you can crank out big miles each day? Or do you just generally crank out big miles no matter what? So yes, I said it before, I'll say it now that I have completed the PCT. I think, in my opinion, that the Appalachian Trail is much harder hiking. For the most part, the PCT was a pretty smooth, easy, gentle trail. Now, it definitely had its hard parts of the trail, but for the most part, it was nice and cruisy. See, the difference between East Coast hiking and West Coast hiking is on the East Coast, the mountains are smaller, but they're much steeper, much rockier, and much rootier. And on the West Coast, the mountains are taller, but it's more gradual to get to the top of the mountain. And then once you're at the top, you stay at the top for a while before you drop back down. Where on the East Coast, it's kind of like a roller coaster. You just up, down, up, down, up, down. So yes, I still think that the Appalachian Trail is a much harder trail. And because the PCT is a smoother, little bit easier trail, a lot bit easier, I was able to crank out bigger miles where I was putting in 20 to 30 mile days every single day. And right in Washington, we were doing 30 to 40 mile days every day. The reason I was doing such big miles is because I was able to, so I took advantage of it and cranked out some big days. Alright guys, so hopefully that answers a bunch of the most commonly asked questions about my PCT through hike. I'll probably be doing another one of these Q&As probably next month, just to answer some general questions. But next week I will have a Q&A with my video editor, Pendergast, the lady who helped put all of these awesome PCT videos together, so keep an eye out for that. I have a bunch of really big news coming up for the channel, for me, and some of the next trips and adventures that I'm going to be going on, so stay tuned because I'll be making some pretty big announcements soon. If you haven't had a chance yet, go over and check me out on Instagram. I've been posting a ton of new photos lately of some of the things that Snuggles and I have coming up, plus a bunch of pictures from my PCT through hike. If you found any value in this video, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and as always guys, thanks for watching.